The lore and overall story of the Five Nights at Freddy's series has become a meme for being hard to follow and convoluted. I personally attribute this to the fact that the series is supposed to end like 5 times, and also the fact that the mystery of the story was a big part of the community. Especially in indie games, it's not uncommon to have a game where all the backstory and history has to be found through lore details. Today, I'm aiming to lay out the entire story of the first 6 Five Nights at Freddy's games from the point of view of someone just playing the games and trying to figure things out as they go. Some of the lore is unlocked by completing challenges I personally didn't bother with. I just want to be transparent about that. I'm also going to do my best to stick to what can be backed up with evidence. If I ever start talking about my own theories, I'll make that clear. With all that in mind, we have to go back to the original Five Nights at Freddy's. This game doesn't really have much in the way of world building or implying a bigger story. Most of the information you get is in the form of these voice messages at the beginning of each night, and these are mostly just related to the gameplay. We do get a little though. We're told about an event referred to as the Bite of 87, in which an animatronic bit a chunk of someone's brain out. The man sending you these voice messages also dies in the Night 4 one.
I always wondered what was in all those empty heads back there. Oh no.
That scream is just like the one that plays when you get killed by Golden Freddy, so we can probably guess who did it. I would not blame anyone for thinking there was nothing else to the first game, but there is some more lore hidden within. And by hidden, I mean buried to such an extent I don't know how Scott Cawthon expected anyone to see it. I've talked about how you don't use the cameras much, and sometimes on one camera, a piece of paper with rules on it is replaced by one of 4 newspaper clippings, and these hint at a larger story. A total of 5 children who were last seen at Freddy Fazbear's Pizza had gone missing and are presumed dead. There was a suspect and he was charged for the crime, but the bodies were never found. Police speculate that the suspect dressed as a mascot and lured the children into a back room to kill them. Later on, there were multiple reports of a foul smell coming from the animatronics, which, according to Phone Guy, are never cleaned. This has a pretty disturbing implication, that being the murderer stuffed the dead bodies of the children into the animatronics, and the spirits of those kids would go on to haunt the animatronics and, by extension, the pizzeria. The more you learn about the narrative of this series, the more you realize that this event is the core of the story. Everything in the series either led to it or happened because of it. So let's break out the corkboard and red string and try to form a comprehensive understanding of the missing children incident. Here's what we have so far, but that's all the information we got from the first game. Apparently, it's a point of contention if the second game is a prequel or a sequel, but this should not even be a question. Five Nights at Freddy's 2 is 100% a prequel, and I can think of 3 things supporting that off the top of my head. First of all, the check you get upon completing Night 5 is dated 1987. The way they talked about the Bite of 87 in the first game makes it seem like 1987 was a few years prior. Second, they mentioned that the previous location was called Fredbear's Family Diner, while the location in the first game was still called Freddy Fazbear's Pizza. Also, the man on the phone is the same as the one in the first game. You know, that guy who died. I mentioned that Five Nights at Freddy's 2 had a more is more approach, and that is extended to the lore. Beginning with the calls, there is an indication that something important is happening in the background. There's talk of a criminal investigation happening, one that would lead to the restaurant getting shut down for a few days, and then until further notice. The most notable clue is found in the phone call from the bonus Night 6.
The place is closed down, at least for a while. Someone used one of the suits. We had a spare in the bag, a yellow one. Someone used it. Now none of them are acting right.
This points to the investigation being about the missing children incident. It's also worth noting that the newspaper clippings mention that the event happened in late June, and the phone call in Night 1 calls this your summer job. Going with this theory, one line from the phone calls suddenly becomes very interesting.
From what I understand, the building is on lockdown, and no one is allowed in or out, especially concerning any previous employees.
This implies that the suspect of the murders was someone who used to work for Freddy Fazbear's Pizza. This makes sense given how they knew where one of the spare costumes were. Also, note that the spare costume was described as a yellow one. There is one yellow character that is only ever seen crumpled on the ground like an empty costume. If this costume is any that we know, it's Golden Freddy. Either that or this is misdirection. The rest of the lore in 2 comes from the death minigames. They show us a representation of the man who killed the children, a purple figure the fanbase calls Purple Guy. It also shows one murder where a kid is killed outside of a building, so this is possibly a different kid from any in the missing children incident. We also see that the puppet played a very significant role. It appears that when the kids were killed, it was the puppet that put their spirits into the animatronics, but the nature and origin of the puppet remains unclear in the second game. At this point, we have a clearer outline of the missing children incident, but there are still several unknowns, namely who Purple Guy is and what happened to him. The third game does provide some of the answers, and keep in mind that this was originally the game meant to wrap everything up. One thing to briefly mention is that there's a secret good ending to this game. After jumping through a set of hoops so random and ridiculous, I refuse to believe anybody found this out without looking through the code or looking up a guide. You can give the spirits of the children the birthdays they were never allowed in life. And it's implied that at least the spirits haunting Freddy, Bonnie, Chica, and Foxy are able to move on. And that does explain why they aren't present in any games that come after 3 in the timeline. But Five Nights at Freddy's 3 has so much more lore to drop. Aside from Springtrap, your coworkers found some training tapes in the abandoned location and we get to listen to them throughout the game. It's the same voice as the recordings from the first 2 games, and it's training for how to be a performer. They talk about a type of costume that doubles as an animatronic, using what the phone guy refers to as spring locks. You turn a crank and the robot parts move out of the way, allowing for an employee to put on the costume. The problem is that this is a horribly dangerous system. Because if the spring locks get released, the metal parts will shoot out, even if the costume is being worn. These catastrophic failures can be caused by anything from excess moisture to just touching the spring locks wrong. Eventually, injuries and deaths became so common they discontinued the spring lock costumes. This also mentions a sister location, long before any of the fans knew about Circus Baby's Pizza World. One consequence of the Springlock suits is that now it's not only Golden Freddy who could have been used to commit the murders. Any of the animatronics could also have been costumes. So the yellow one mentioned in 2 could also have been Chica, or more likely Springtrap, who looks like he might have been yellow at some point. This is more or less confirmed by the tape we hear in Night 5.
We've also been made aware that the Spring Bonnie animatronic has been noticeably moved.
Finally, we have a name for the character Springtrap is based off of, Spring Bonnie. This also makes it possible that the animatronic trying to kill us in 3 is the same costume used to lure the kids to their deaths in the missing children incident. We also find out in the calls that every location has a safe room that's off camera and closed to the public. And if that's where Purple Guy took the kids to kill them, that means he's definitely a part of Fazbear Entertainment, or was at some point. We don't just get information from these tapes, however. At the end of every night in 3, we see an interactive cutscene in the same Atari arcade style as the death minigames from 2. The cutscene after Night 5 shows us that the connection between Springtrap and the missing children incident goes much deeper than the tapes might lead you to believe. In these scenes, we see Purple Guy, the man who killed the children, in what looks like an abandoned Freddy Fazbear's Pizza. And throughout these scenes, he's been disassembling the animatronics. In the final cutscene, he sees the ghosts of the children and freaks out. For some reason, whether he thinks it will scare the kids off or what, he gets back into the Spring Bonnie costume. That's when the suit has a malfunction. This whole time, Springtrap contained the dead body of Purple Guy and was being haunted by his spirit. Now it makes sense why this animatronic was so much more dangerous than the others. On Night 6's tape, it said that all the secret rooms were going to be sealed with a false wall. This being relayed to us right after seeing how Purple Guy died implies that he was sealed away in that room for who knows how long before he was unearthed by Fazbear's Fright. Seeing that he killed at least 5 children, the years of solitary confinement are quite deserved. I think this would have been a decent end to the series if it had stopped there. We still don't really know who Purple Guy was, but we do see a sort of justice with his fitting death and new life as Springtrap. The ghosts of the children have also passed on, so that's about as good an ending for them as one could expect. But there are still some loose ends here. Mainly who Purple Guy was and what happens to Springtrap. No matter what ending you get in the third game, Springtrap escapes. He's still out there. We do eventually get a conclusion to that, but that's not until Pizzeria Simulator. In the meantime, we got Five Nights at Freddy's 4. I said that this game was light on plot, but it does have a fair amount of lore in the form of these interactive cutscenes between nights. These tell the sad story of a little boy who is terrified of the Fazbear animatronics and is constantly terrorized by his older brother. His only friends are seemingly his stuffed animals, especially one of Fredbear. The Fredbear toy has this weird vibe. It talks to the kid and teleports around like it's omnipotent. I don't really know if this is an imaginary friend or if it's possessed or what. I don't like it though. Watching the scenes of this poor kid's suffering made me feel very uncomfortable. The whole thing felt voyeuristic. It added to the vibe that the fourth game is something I'm not even supposed to be watching. One thing we can glean here is that the scenes at a restaurant are taking place at Fredbear's family diner, because we see animatronics like Fredbear and Spring Bonnie. This makes these events the earliest in the Five Nights at Freddy's timeline that we know of. An Easter egg in a later game implies that these events take place in the year 1983, so that's 4 years before the events of 2. These cutscenes all build up to a party, revealed to be the child's birthday party taking place at Fredbear's family diner. Considering how obviously afraid of the animatronics he is, the fact that he's forced to go there for his own birthday tells me that one or both of his parents are not great parents, to put it nicely. Add the bully older brother and I do not envy this kid's home life. Speaking of which, the older brother and his friends bully the child some more, taking things much further than we'd previously seen it go. But then something goes horribly wrong. It's not clear if this was a genuine accident or if there was always something wrong with the animatronics at this place, but either way, this is the first major event in the timeline, referred to by fans as the Bite of 83. And I would hazard a guess that this is when the paranormal activity at these locations started. The bite doesn't kill the kid immediately, but in the Night 6 cutscene we do see a representation of him succumbing to his injuries. He hears 2 voices. The first is in the gray text of the older brother, saying that he's not sure if his brother can hear him, but he's sorry. The second voice says something a little more cryptic. You're broken. We are still your friends. Do you still believe that? I'm still here. I will put you back together. It's not clear who says this. The text color is similar to the Fredbear toy's yellow, but it's not a perfect match. The music playing conveys that this is supposed to be heartfelt, but something about this feels very ominous to me. Then we hear the sound of a flatline as the child passes away. This is a tragic story, but the most pressing question is, what on earth does this have to do with the series narrative? Up until now, everything has led back to the missing children incident, but this seems unrelated. There is a connection, but that isn't revealed in this game. Finally, after completing Night 7, we're shown a lockbox that we can't open, and the text, perhaps some things are best left forgotten, for now. This box is probably the biggest unsolved mystery in the entire series, and what's inside it is a question I personally have never found that interesting. This doesn't come back, so it really doesn't matter what's in the box. It's completely open to speculation. On that subject, it's not just unclear what the story in the cutscenes has to do with the missing children incident, it's not even clear what connection they have to 4's gameplay. The crying child's house and the house of the game itself definitely look different, but if it's a nightmare like the game implies, that might not matter. It's also dubious which character from the cutscenes, if any, is the child we play as. In my opinion, the 2 most likely options are the crying child, and this is all before the Bite of 83, or the older brother, and this takes place after it. However, just looking at 4, there's no evidence really pointing one way or another. But that concludes the lore of the 4th game. There's a lot of it, but none of it really connects to the lore of the whole story. Thankfully, some of these connections are drawn in sister location. This game is full of information, more than any game before it, so there's a lot to unpack here. Upon opening the game for the first time, we hear a conversation between 2 people. The creator of Circus Baby, referred to as Mr. Afton, and one other person, presumably a colleague or employee. That person asked Afton about some of the features of the animatronic, but we don't really hear a direct answer. This is the only time we hear from Mr. Afton in this game, but he's a major player in the story. Between nights, we hear voice clips from a little girl. Context clues tell us that she's Mr. Afton's daughter, and she wants to see Circus Baby, but for some reason he won't let her. It's implied that she sneaks off to go see her at some point, but if you just play the base game, you don't see how that turns out. Most of the really important lore in Sister Location is found in the bonus content, starting with the secret ending to the death minigame. We do hear from Circus Baby that something strange occurred when she was alone in a room with a little girl, and in the death minigame, we can see what happened for ourselves. This is not a bug, this is a feature. Circus Baby was designed to take children. That has to be why Mr. Afton made her in the first place. Fazbear Entertainment has been comically negligent and shady throughout these games, but this is the first example of someone in it, presumably a higher-up, doing something evil. It also explains why he didn't want his daughter anywhere near Circus Baby. So Mr. Afton is fine with kidnapping and/or murdering children as long as it's not his kid. Got it. After seeing Circus Baby in action, the alternate route for Night 5 is unlocked, allowing access to the private room. There is a Fredbear toy on the desk, much like the one from 4's cutscenes, with what looks like a remote or a walkie-talkie in its lap, and when 1983 is put in the keypad, the 3 monitors show security footage of the house from the gameplay. This has massive implications. First of all, even if the gameplay of 4 is a nightmare, the setting is based on something very much real. I think this gives more credence to the idea that the playable character in 4 is not the crying child. In his short life, we don't see him in this house at all, so I'm leaning more towards the nightmares being that of the older brother, who definitely would have some trauma surrounding the animatronics, Fredbear in particular. Either way, now we know whoever set up the private room has a direct connection to the 4th game. They would have to be an authority figure at Circus Baby's Pizza World, and the only one we know about is Mr. Afton. During my review of Ennard Night, one thing I didn't mention is that you hear Circus Baby talking to you the whole time, trying to convince you to let Ennard in. At around 4 AM though, the voice we hear changes.
Everything is okay. I'm still here.
That is the voice of Mr. Afton's daughter, confirming what you probably already guessed, being that she was the little girl taken by Circus Baby. Good bit of dramatic irony there. Mr. Afton's invention got the one kid on the planet he didn't want it to, and now her spirit haunts the robot that killed her. The voice of Mr. Afton's daughter is a big enough reveal, but one of the lines in particular stands out.
Isn't this why you came here? Be with me again.
The way that this is worded says something about Mike, the character you play as in Sister Location. The fact that they say this and switch to the voice of Afton's daughter when the night is almost over says there is some sort of connection between her and Mike. Perhaps he was a childhood friend of hers or a family member. Whatever the case, that does explain the immediate fascination Circus Baby had with him. Beating Ennard Night unlocks the custom nights of Sister Location, and playing the custom night shows a series of arcade-style cutscenes. In them, we see the aftermath of Mike getting gutted and worn by Ennard. His body becomes more and more decayed until it gives out completely and Ennard leaves to go into the sewers. Then, somehow, he gets back up. How this is possible is not explained at all in Sister Location, but an explanation is hinted at in Pizzeria Simulator, so we'll get to that later. I've gone over a lot of information in this game, but the biggest lore bombshell is dropped upon completing the most difficult custom night. We hear the voice of Mike, or Michael as he calls himself, talking to his father. Just the fact that he has a British accent says enough, because the only other characters in the game with that accent are Mr. Afton and his daughter. But when you look at what's being said, you can tell that he's Mr. Afton's son. And I would like to zoom in on this one sentence.
I put her back together, just like you asked me to.
Word choice is an important writing tool, and it's often used to set up motifs meant to connect things together and invoke a certain concept. The one other time in this series I know of where this phrase is used that way is here. I think this indicates that Mr. Afton is closely connected to the crying child, most likely as his father. And by process of elimination, Michael Afton is probably the bully older brother. This means that 2 of his siblings were killed by animatronics, one of the deaths being his fault. This story became hereditary all of a sudden, it's wild. But the biggest reveal of all happens at the end of this cutscene, where we see who Michael is talking to, and how this all connects to the story from the first 3 games.
There is only one thing left for me to do now. I'm going to come find you. I'm going to come find you.
Most of this game's lore tells us the story of Mr. Afton and his family, but Mr. Afton is not a character that we just met in Sister Location. We've actually known him for a while. He is Purple Guy, the man who murdered those children and would go on to become Springtrap. This whole time, these 2 last games were giving us background for the events of the story. And with that, we finally have a fairly comprehensive understanding of the missing children incident. We know who, what, when, where, and how. The 2 largest remaining unknowns are why he did it and how this all ends. Those 2 questions are answered by the final game, Freddy Fazbear's Pizzeria Simulator. One thing that becomes clear pretty quickly is that this whole pizzeria is a front for an operation aiming to get all the remaining animatronics in one place. This includes Molten Freddy, Scrap Baby, and Mr. Afton, who is listed as William Afton in the credits. The one animatronic that doesn't fit is Lefty because we haven't seen them before. It's worth noting that Lefty is the most dangerous animatronic in Pizzeria Simulator. They're the last one salvaged with the highest value and have a liability rating of 9, where most other dangerous items have a rating of like 4 or 5. Whoever or whatever Lefty is, they're powerful. When it comes to who is trying to round these animatronics up, the obvious answer is our boss, the mysterious man we only ever hear from on a tape recorder. I know what this character's name is, it's from the books, but for the sake of this video, I'm just going to call him the boss. Any information about him is saved for one of the game's multiple endings, so in the meantime, I want to talk about lore tidbits you can find in the Morning Tycoon part of the game. One of the things you can buy for your pizzeria are arcade games, and 3 of them have information about the overall story hidden within. First is Fruity Maze, which initially seems like a regular arcade game reminiscent of Pac-Man, but in this game, nothing is as it seems. Occasionally, the screen will flash, revealing the image of a little girl happily playing. Things stay looking normal until the first level is cleared. Then the game turns into a creepypasta with blood and gore everywhere, while the girl playing becomes visibly upset. After beating the level a second time, it starts up again with even more anomalies. But more importantly, a familiar face appears next to the little girl. He's not really dead. He's over here. Follow me. This sequence appears to represent one of the abductions from the missing children incident. William Afton, dressed as Spring Bonnie, lured a little girl with the promise of her dog not really being dead. Fruity Maze doesn't really give us revelatory information, but it does show us Afton's MO of manipulation. The second game with lore, Midnight Motorist, is much more vague. After going out of bounds through a hole in the bottom wall, we transition to a car driving in the rain, with a really fun and catchy song playing, by the way. The yellow figure driving the car can either go to what looks like a bar named Junior's, where the bouncer gently reminds him that he's banned from the premises, or go back to his house where he looks for one of his children. He discovers that the kids snuck out and the sequence ends. Even now, the fanbase hasn't been able to decode Midnight Motorist. Who we play as, when this takes place, and the overall context is open to interpretation. If you ask me, I think that the yellow man is William Afton driving home drunk. The person at the TV is his wife or husband, who knows, and the missing kid is Michael Afton, who by that point is the only living Afton child we know about. I believe this scene is meant to illustrate that William Afton had a fall from grace after 2 of his kids died, one because of his own actions. But again, my interpretation is as good as anyone else's. Lastly, upon buying the security puppet, we can play a game where the puppet is trying to protect a child with a green bracelet. Upon repeated playthroughs, we see the child with the bracelet outside while the puppet is trapped in its box. When it finally does go outside, getting damaged by the rain, it's revealed that the child is dead. The puppet collapses by the corpse as the screen fades to black. This minigame reminds me of the death minigame from 2, where one kid is killed by Purple Guy outside of a building. If we assume that the games both depict the same event, this shows how the puppet got possessed by a spirit. The puppet was designed to protect one child in particular, but that kid got killed by William Afton. However, the child's spirit possessed the puppet and tried to save other children Afton murdered by putting them in their own animatronic bodies. It's interesting to finally hear about the puppet again, who hasn't made a direct appearance in this series since the second game. And now we can get to the 2 endings of Pizzeria Simulator that provide some answers or closure. We get lore from what's called the Insanity ending. You buy a thing, do some stuff during the day section, and are shown some blueprints while a recording of the boss is played. I'm going to start by dissecting the boss's monologue. The key points to take away here are that he knows William Afton, or knew him at some point, knows he killed the kids, and knows their spirits possess the animatronics. He laments about the kids' spirits being trapped, so he doesn't know about the good ending to the 3rd game, despite knowing all this other stuff somehow. When he mentions William trapping the kids and hurting them again, I believe he's talking about what we saw in the arcade cutscenes from 3, where he lures the animatronics to the secret room one by one before dismantling them. 2 other things of note are that he apparently created the animatronics like Freddy Fazbear, Bonnie, etc., and the wound Afton caused was first inflicted on him. If he designed several of the animatronics, he was high up in the company, much like William Afton. That does explain how he has the money to do this whole fake pizzeria operation. Chronologically, the first murder William Afton directly committed that we know of was that kid outside a Fazbear restaurant. If that was the boss's child, that means he probably created the puppet to protect them, which didn't work. He ends by vowing to bring all the animatronics back, which we already know by now. As for the blueprints on the monitor, one of them is just the audio lore we use in this game, but the other 2 are very interesting. One is of the scoop machine from Sister Location, and parts are labeled with names like Remnant Reservoir or Remnant Injector. The process of spirits possessing animatronics and how it works has always been nebulous, but this appears to be something made to automate the process. This might explain why, when it's used improperly, there can be unexpected outcomes, like Michael Afton not dying despite his entrails getting ripped out. Also, note how it says heat can destroy the remnant's properties. Keep that in mind for later. Lastly, we see the blueprint for Lefty, which is apparently an acronym. Lefty is designed to find, capture, and contain another animatronic. Which animatronic that is, you could probably guess, but it is confirmed with the image you get upon refusing to salvage Lefty. You can see the puppet's striped arms inside the outer body. After all that info dumping, this cutscene ends with you getting fired and shipped off to an insane asylum. Aside from all the lore, I think now we can piece together a guess at William Afton's motives. The first murder was of the boss's child, which was probably motivated by spite. At that point, 1 or 2 of Afton's kids were killed by animatronics, the first one probably having been made by the boss. I can also see the possible goal of taking down Freddy Fazbear's Pizza, leaving just his own branch of the company, Circus Baby's Pizza World. But considering how many possessed animatronics were at the Sister Location, and the fact that he even has a machine to cause these possessions, means there was probably some element of experimentation as well. The ultimate goal of these experiments can range from, at best, bringing his 2 dead kids back, to, at worst, giving himself eternal life. But now we have as complete an understanding as we can of the missing children incident, the core event of this whole story. All that's left is to see how it all ends. If you salvage all 4 animatronics and make it through the 6 days without going bankrupt, you get what is universally agreed to be the true ending of Pizzeria Simulator. It starts with Circus Baby doing what she does best, talking. She assumed that William Afton is the one who set this all up, and now she's going to make him proud. If I had to guess, I'd say that this is the reason why the rest of Ennard kicked her out. She loves her dad and wants to please him, while I can only imagine all the other animatronics loathe William Afton. But whatever else she was planning on saying, she's cut off by the boss, who calls her Elizabeth.
I'm sorry to interrupt you, Elizabeth, if you still even remember that name. But I'm afraid you've been misinformed.
What happens next is a scene I have not heard one single negative thing about. I think this ending is the best moment in the series. The temperature gauge we use in the Office gameplay steadily increases as the building burns to the ground, destroying the remnant of the animatronics and letting the trapped spirits move on. As this happens, the boss has one last speech about how the missing children incident will soon be forgotten, and the world can finally start healing from the pain that it caused. The writing and delivery of this monologue is excellent, and I'd mostly recommend seeing it for yourself, but I would like to highlight my favorite part.
For most of you, I believe there is peace, and perhaps more, waiting for you after the smoke clears. Although for one of you, the darkest pit of hell has opened to swallow you whole, so don't keep the devil waiting, friend.
I know this is a silly game made for children, but that is so metal. And considering everything William Afton has done, the darkest pit of hell is no less than what he deserves. In this speech, it's implied that the character we play as in Pizzeria Simulator is Michael Afton, who finally made good on his promise to find his father. The boss ends with one final goodbye to his daughter, as he, Michael, and all the animatronics burn. After the transmission cuts out, the helper AI that was giving us the tutorials thanks us for the hard work and the game ends. Considering how messy the narrative of Five Nights at Freddy's is, this is about the best ending we could have realistically hoped for. Nearly all the loose ends are tied up, leaving just a few questions for the fanbase to speculate about. And with that, the story finally comes to a close. At least until Steel Wolf Studios retconned the ending in Security Breach. But then they kind of retconned their retcon with the Ruin DLC. It's a whole thing I don't want to get into right now. For the sake of this video, that is where the story ends. I think a big part of the Five Nights at Freddy's online community was trying to decode the lore and people telling each other their own ideas. And it really popularized the idea of a game theory. Since then, it has been an element of all kinds of video game fan communities, from other mascot horror games like Poppy Playtime to indie games to AAA games. The Five Nights at Freddy's rabbit hole goes very deep, and even everything I talked about in this giant retrospective is still just the tip of the iceberg. There is so much more to explore if this topic interests you. I made these videos because the topic interested me, and also another reason that should be obvious in the near future. But for now, I'm done. It has been a while since I made content like this, and it was quite the process, but I hope you enjoyed it if you stuck it out till the end. Thanks for watching.